Easy guys, welcome back to the lab. In our last video, the Sapling, an evolution simulator where my ecosystems go to suffer, every carnivore died. Every single one. This time, I was determined to change that. What I didn't expect was a carnivore that refused to die. But first, we must prepare the substrate. A world with an island at one end, Carnivore Island, separated from the mainland by ocean. The mainland featured a mountain range to keep species contained on either side, and a wide range of temperatures to prevent any one species dominating the map. Don't ask about the rest, I've no idea what I'm doing. To begin, I needed to seed this barren land with life. No aquatic organisms would exist in this world, only land-based. No particular reason, I simply chose not to think about it. I started with small plants built for the hot, arid equator. Two variants, wind shrub, whose fruit could glide on the wind, and fruit shrub with edible fruit. I know, my naming conventions surprise even myself. Next, plants for the cooler climates. No single leaf can specialize across an entire temperature range, which meant no single plant could dominate the planet. A natural check, mostly unintentional. Then I moved to grass. As many pollination types as possible, wind spread, creature spread, some bearing fruit, variety, all in the name of science. Taller plants followed. From previous experience, these tend to bully the smaller ones into extinction, so I gave them less fruit, fewer offspring, and less energy profit. Whether this would balance out, time would tell. The trees got taller, then taller still. The problem with tall trees is they need more leaves to be energy profitable. But more leaves require a bigger tree, which requires more leaves. I had accidentally invented a pyramid scheme. Then, ganja leaves. Heat and moisture resistant, but they hate drafts. What the creatures did with them later is between them and the simulation. Finally, cold-resistant trees with rich pollen high in the canopy and edible fruit for the lower levels. Then, mushrooms, feeding on the detritus of dead plants and creatures, returning nutrients to the soil. Nature's cleanup crew. Now for our first creatures. At the bottom of the chain were the grass eaters. Their survival strategy was simple: reproduce quickly, die less. Technically, their function was to be eaten. We prefer the term nutritional volunteers. The fatter the body, the better for conserving warmth. Ideal for our colder regions, backed up by fur for cold resistance. For those who watched the first video, yes, Smurf Blue returns. Some traditions are worth preserving. I kept the design deliberately simple. Better creature parts meant more time in the egg, and any time not spent alive eating and multiplying was a liability. I also made them asexual. Pursuing a mate takes time that could be better spent eating. They got eyes that could see far, in black and white only, optimized for finding food, not for appreciating the scenery. Some might look at them and see blue tack, others food, but the simulation would know them as Lenly lops. That didn't roll off the tongue. We shall call them Lenny plops. Next, Lenny plop's warmer cousin, slender body to shed heat, simple eggs, the same black and white eyes, and a comb for temperature management. Essentially a tropical Lenny plops. As I released them into the world, I realized I'd forgotten to give them instincts. The equipment did not need bleaching just yet, however. They could simply be redesigned and reintroduced as a new variant, a minor setback. The simulation called this one Denton. We shall call it Thermoplop. If you have better names for our life forms, leave it in the comments. The winning suggestion may be featured in a future video. Probably. Next, a slightly larger herbivore, a seed eater. I didn't want these competing with the plops at the bottom of the food chain. These would reach higher, grazing on seeds and fruit from taller trees, alongside shrooms foraged from the ground below. Large ears for heat tolerance, and since larger species generally live longer, I opted for sexual reproduction this time. Despite designing them for warmer climates, they immediately avoided the warmer parts of the map, a problem for future me. To make matters worse, the UI, the silent enemy, refused to cooperate, blocking me from placing the opposite sex into the world due to buttons simply not working. Nevertheless, science waits for no one. I pressed on. I had also forgotten instincts. Again, the methodology here is consistent if nothing else. I then realized that since part of their diet was mushrooms, I could create a mushroom whose spores spread by being eaten. A symbiotic relationship seemed like a terrible idea. I did it anyway. After carefully smearing the new shrooms across the map, we were ready. The original simulation called them Olcators. I would call them Okadoke, possibly more offensive than the original name, but the bar was low. I noticed some Datamicus, an earlier instinctless version of Okadoke, had somehow survived. Science had other plans. Their gene pool was sterilized, and then, my beautiful ecosystem. Lenny plops were thriving, though I couldn't shake the feeling that my plants hadn't been faring as well. Patches of bare land were appearing, and both spruce shrub and wind shrub had died out completely. I reintroduced them, hoping the more complete ecosystem would support them this time, and added more fruit to fruit shrub in hopes that increased offspring would give them a fighting chance. Next, something bigger. A long-necked grazer built for taller trees, sturdy legs to support their weight, slow but strong. A primitive trunk for feeding on plants, seeds and fruit, kept affordable to reduce time they spent in the egg. Daytime eyes with a decent color spectrum, temperature preference sitting moderately in the band between extreme cold and extreme heat. Comfortable in the middle, but not so much as to compete with the other creatures, leaving the edges of the map to other species. There were plenty of fruit waiting for them high up in the wooby trees. The simulation called this one Daricus. We would call them Thunder Trunks. Thunder Trunks had claimed the wooby canopy, grazing contently, and consuming what the data suggested was a non-trivial quantity of ganja. We had been warned. However, elsewhere in the experiment things were less serene. Patches of bare land had appeared to the east, little to nothing growing there. Wind shrub and fruit shrub had died out again despite my improvements. I gave them another chance, unwilling to accept I had once again built an ecosystem where small plants simply couldn't survive. Lenny Plops and Thermoplops picked their way through the corpses of their brethren, unaffected by the morbid reality of their situation. The ecosystem was working. The plants were the weak link. Without a stable base, the whole chain above it was at risk. And if carnivores were ever going to survive here, that foundation needed to hold. The solution was mutations. With the feature activated every time a plant reproduced, it had a chance to randomly alter one of its parts, often leading to its immediate death, but occasionally producing something that thrived. I made the changes and left the simulation to run. Slowly, plant life spread. The east was transformed. Wildpie had become dominant there. Wumdu, tall, thorny plants adapted to cold with fluorescent flowers full of pollen, had colonized the higher ground. The great Wumdu forest were expansive, fruit and pollen for days. Our petri dish was now a verdant landscape. I turned off mutations, satisfied we had bolstered the bottom of the food chain, and gave the mushrooms a brief window to do the same. The next stretch was less science, more housekeeping. Plants reintroduced, mutations activated, legs made faster. Then, a discovery with the Okadoke. Their eggs couldn't tolerate the heat of the central band. The eggs were amended. The Okadoke had been wiped out, edited, and reintroduced. The data was in. We had learned little. Then one of my new Okadoke variants came back from the simulation with a name. Uncle's Bad Lips. Sterilization protocol initiated. Long live gerbil lips, although as time went on, they couldn't seem to find enough food to survive. Carnivores were long overdue, something that would, for the first time in this experiment, not immediately die. The bar was set. A scavenger's mouth, capable of extracting large amounts of energy from meat, like a sausage with teeth. Quick legs for pursuing prey, eyes on the side of its head, which reminded me of a squid. Science, as always, had a vision. A quick note on creature design. I don't labor over appearances in the sapling. The reason is simple. Most of them die. Getting emotionally attached to something that will be extinct in 200 years is a grief nobody needs. I gave it basic instincts. Not the Sharon Stone film, but the usual suite of survival traits. And finally, a quirky green crest, purely for aesthetics. There, something pretty. You're welcome. I reintroduced them across the map. Within moments, several had walked directly into the ocean and appeared to be enjoying it. The apex predators were on holiday. In hindsight, I may have introduced too many, but I had been so preoccupied with whether or not I could, I hadn't stopped to think if I should. Too late. The plop population had been devastated. Our new predator, the scavo, had turned its attention to the thundertrunks. Although their size afforded them some protection, the scavos were also eating each other, and despite being surrounded by prey, most of them starved, as was tradition. I adjusted the thermoplops. Same problem as before, same solution as before. Their eggs couldn't tolerate the heat. At some point I will learn this lesson. Today was not that point. But over time the scavo numbers thinned, and the ecosystem seemed to find balance. The predator populations had stabilized. The prey wasn't gone. Had I finally done it? Meanwhile, Carnivore Island remains empty, as it has for some time now. Thermoplops procreated quickly, while scavos hunted them in the forest and tidied up the corpses afterwards. The ecosystem was functioning, predator and prey in balance. This was remarkably going according to plan, which was new and frankly suspicious. Thermoplop Rex had been the apex creature of our kingdom. Lennyplops were only just holding on. Thundertrunks, who had never once required genetic intervention from science, were doing well, the unsung hero of this experiment, thriving entirely on their own merits. Gerbalips, meanwhile, were hanging on by a thread. The experiment, it seemed, had decided they shouldn't exist. Eventually, the simulation agreed. They were gone. But I couldn't leave them be. First, I swapped their seed-eating mouth for one better suited to heat regulation, which meant I could remove one of their backplates entirely. Fewer parts, less time in the egg, faster to breed. Then I noticed something. The great Wundu forests were full of nectar and nothing was eating it. Not a single species to exploit it. I swapped the mouth again, this time for a proboscis, an untapped food source, and Gerbalips would have it entirely to themselves. I reintroduced them one last time, which got me thinking. Gerbalips could now eat the nectar, but not all of it. The tallest Wundu flowers were still completely out of reach, a gap in the ecosystem, an untapped resource. Naturally, science demanded a solution. I set to work. Giants, adapted for extreme cold, long-lived, with a specialist proboscis built for feeding on the highest Wundu flowers. A creature designed for one very specific purpose, in one very specific place. Now we would see if they could survive. I released them and waited. 200 years passed. I was fully expecting them to die. They didn't. They thrived, in their hundreds, towering heads leering above the canopy. I named them the Flower Tower. Hundreds of years passed. Nothing could knock the Flower Tower's supremacy. They flourished, as did the Wundu forest beneath them, the two species bound together. Most died of old age, some starved, as all things did eventually, but their numbers held. For the first time, something was simply thriving that wasn't a thundertrunk. I still had no predators. Time to reintroduce the scavo, this time modified to feed only on dead animals rather than attacking the living. There was never a shortage of corpses. It seemed like a reasonable plan. I called them the Shavos. They starved. Despite meat lying everywhere, the carnivores of this experiment had developed a remarkable ability to be surrounded by food and die anyway. It was time for a new carnivore, this time large, built for long life, an aggressive meat-eating mouth, long clawed limbs, a tail for balance, large eyes with evil cartoon eyebrows and horns for combat. And 4 hopping legs. A true ambush predator. Nothing would see it coming. It would also breed asexually. No time wasted pursuing a mate, just eating and multiplying. Finally, I gave it a wide temperature tolerance, as broad as I could make it, against every design principle we had carefully established at the start of this experiment. We don't talk about that. There was no way this was going to survive. It was too expensive, too much time in the egg, but time would tell. Their name? No Time. I had also forgotten to give them instincts. Again, the methodology remains consistent. A new strain was created. No Time 2. They were already attacking the flower towers. Things escalated immediately. Hundreds of years passed. No Time 2 were abundant, although this was largely because I had smeared them indulgently across the entire map. A controlled introduction would have been more scientific. But there's no excitement in timid science. Flower tower numbers had been cut in half. Thermoplops had declined. Thundertrunks, as always, without intervention, without fanfare, was still holding on. Votocalypse, a hybrid of the old Olcadoc species, had been finding success with a smaller proboscis. Interesting, we filed this away for later. Hundreds more years passed, and then the flower towers were gone. Not declining, not struggling, gone. I searched the map. 6 remained, 6, from what had been the most dominant species on the planet. This was, by any reasonable measure, my fault. Too many no times introduced. And yet no time too had survived. Their fate, it had turned out, was not dependent on the flower towers at all. They had simply moved on to other prey. I reintroduced the flower towers now that predator populations had stabilized. It would be interesting to see what happened next. Hundreds of years passed. No time 2's population had increased, and for the first time in this experiment we had actual data. Predator numbers correlating with prey numbers, rising and falling together. A functioning predator-prey relationship. I was surprised they survived at all. I jumped forward 1,000 years. Surely the no times would fall. They hadn't. And Votocalypse, written off long ago, had returned in numbers. Life, it seems, finds a way. I jumped another 2,500 years. While the time screen loaded, I noticed we had lost a land species, the carnivores. Surely had finally gone extinct. But no. It was the flower towers, who had once again gone extinct. The pattern was becoming clear. They thrived in isolation, but introduce a predator and they collapsed every time. No time 2 was still alive. How? Their most common cause of death wasn't starvation, it wasn't predation. It was heat. They were dying because it was too warm. The apex predators of this ecosystem were being defeated by the weather. And yet, some had lived to old age, surviving on a diet of thermoplops and Votocalypse, neither of which seemed particularly bothered by having a predator around. A balance of sorts, accidental, but real. This was our only surviving group of no times, and here is where the asexual breeding mattered. Any one of them could reproduce alone, no mate required, no time wasted, just survival in whatever corner of the map they could find. And yet here they were, clustered together, despite having no biological reason to be. Perhaps they enjoyed the company, even though they didn't, like a cat. And then there were the Thunder Trunks. Never the flashiest creature, never the most advanced. They had never required genetic intervention, never been edited or reintroduced or sterilized or rebuilt from scratch. They had simply existed, quietly, stubbornly, across the entire length of this experiment and refused to stop. The unsung hero of this ecosystem, as they always had been, and against every expectation, the carnivores had survived too. Not because of careful design, not because of scientific rigor, but because one asexual predator in whatever corner of the map it could find had simply refused to die. The method was unconventional, the results were concerning, but they were results. Carnivore Island remains empty. There was supposed to be a grand finale, carnivores unleashed, proper documented chaos. But the experiment took an unexpected turn, as experiments tend to do when you're not paying attention. And so here we are. The data was in, the results completely unrepeatable. And with that, goodbye.